Life had finally found a rhythm, a steady, comforting beat that had been missing for far too long. Years had passed since the storm had ripped through my existence, leaving behind a wreckage I wasn't sure I'd ever fully recover from. But I had. Slowly, painstakingly, I'd pieced myself back together, built a life that felt genuinely mine. The ghosts of the past still flickered at the edges, a constant reminder of what I'd endured, particularly where my sister was concerned. But for the most part, I could breathe easy. That fragile peace shattered one Tuesday evening with the shrill ring of my phone. An unfamiliar number flashed across the screen, and a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. Hesitantly, I answered. What followed was a torrent of panicked sobs, barely coherent words tumbling out in a desperate rush. It took me a moment to even recognize the voice, choked with tears and hysteria as it was. But then a name broke through the noise, a name I hadn't heard in years. Sarah. My sister. Through the broken sentences, the horrifying truth began to emerge. Sarah and her husband were in jail. In jail. The words echoed in my mind, heavy and surreal. And then came the desperate plea, the reason for the unexpected call. They needed me to check on their daughters, their twin girls, my nieces. Before I could even process the shock, before I could ask the 1,000 questions that immediately sprang to mind, what had they done? Why were they arrested? Where were the girls? The line went dead. Just like that. Silence. The dial tone hummed in my ear, mocking the chaos the call had unleashed. My mind raced. Sarah and I hadn't spoken in what felt like a lifetime, not since the day I walked out of prison, a free but deeply scarred woman. And her daughters. I hadn't seen them since they were toddlers, before everything fell apart. Now, they were older, I guessed around 7 or 8, but they were strangers to me. Strangers whose parents, the people who should have been protecting them, were behind bars. Despite the years of silence, the bitter history that lay between Sarah and me, a cold tendril of responsibility snaked its way into my heart. Those were my nieces. Innocent children caught in a mess they didn't create. I might have wanted to slam the phone down and pretend the call never happened, to let Sarah face the consequences of her choices alone. But the thought of those 2 little girls, alone and scared, was enough to override my anger, at least for now. I had to know what was going on. I had to find out where my nieces were. I spent the next morning making calls, pulling on threads of old acquaintances and contacts I'd carefully distanced myself from over the years. It wasn't easy dredging up the past, but the image of my nieces' frightened faces, though I hadn't seen them in so long, spurred me on. Eventually, I managed to piece together some information. The twins were indeed in foster care, placed there a couple of days prior. The details were vague, but the fact that they were in the system at all sent a fresh wave of anxiety through me. Later that day, I finally managed to get back in touch with Sarah. This time, she was more composed, though the underlying panic was still palpable in her voice. Her tone was a strange mix of desperation and a forced calmness, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me that everything would be all right. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "You have to help them. They're just little girls. They don't understand what's happening." Her words tugged at something deep within me, a primal instinct to protect the innocent. But the years of hurt and betrayal stood like a wall between us. "Sarah," I said, my voice firm despite the turmoil inside. "Tell me what happened. Why are you and Mark in jail?" I needed to know the truth, the real truth, not some sugar-coated version. Her story tumbled out, a jumbled narrative of accusations and denials. According to Sarah, our old boss, Mr. Henderson, was back to his old tricks. She claimed he had framed her and Mark for financial crimes, some kind of embezzlement scheme. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Henderson. The same man whose lies and manipulations had landed me in prison years ago. The irony was sickening. He set us up," she insisted, her voice laced with a desperate plea for belief. "Just like he did to you." Then came the inevitable apology, a tearful reiteration of her regret for what she had done years ago. Her testimony, she sobbed, her voice thick with self-pity, had been the thing that sealed my conviction. She hadn't understood, she claimed. She'd been pressured, manipulated. The excuses, so familiar, so hollow, washed over me. The memories flooded back, sharp and painful. The day the verdict was read, the cold dread that had settled in my stomach, the clanging of the prison gates shutting behind me. 18 months. 18 months of my life stolen. My career in the small investment firm I'd worked so hard to build, gone. My marriage, already strained, had crumbled under the weight of the accusations and the legal battles. And Henderson? He'd walked away scot-free, the true criminal laughing all the way to the bank. The evidence against me had been flimsy at best, deemed insufficient upon appeal, but the damage was done. My reputation was tarnished, my life irrevocably altered. I vividly recalled the day I was released. Sarah had been waiting for me outside the prison gates, a hesitant smile on her face. She'd offered a weak hug and suggested we just put it all behind us. Put it all behind us? As if 18 months of my life, my reputation, my marriage, could simply be erased with a few well-chosen words. The audacity of it had been staggering. I hadn't held back. The raw anger, the years of simmering resentment had finally boiled over. I'd told her, in no uncertain terms, exactly what I thought of her betrayal. I'd made it clear that I wanted nothing more to do with her, that she was dead to me. The hardest part, the collateral damage of my fury, was knowing that it meant cutting off contact with my nieces, Lily and Daisy. Even then, as young as they were, I'd adored them. But the thought of having Sarah in my life, a constant reminder of her lies, was unbearable. So, I'd walked away, leaving her standing there, tears streaming down her face. It was a brutal decision, one that had haunted me in the quiet moments, but one I'd felt was necessary for my own survival. Shortly after that, I'd packed up what little I had left and moved across the country. I needed a fresh start, a place where no one knew my name, where my past couldn't follow me. Slowly, painstakingly, I'd rebuilt my life. I'd thrown myself into my work, leveraging my financial background into a successful consulting career. It wasn't easy earning back trust, but I was meticulous, detail-oriented, and fiercely protective of my reputation. Eventually, I found love again, a wonderful partner who knew everything about my past and had helped me learn to trust again, even if a part of me remained perpetually guarded. Despite the happiness I'd found, a sliver of cynicism always lingered. Working with new clients, especially in the financial sector, I was hyper-vigilant. Every document was scrutinized, every detail verified. If something felt off, I didn't hesitate to walk away. I wouldn't be caught in that kind of trap again. Now, hearing Sarah's story about Henderson framing her, a wave of skepticism washed over me. Could it be true? Was it possible that she was genuinely innocent this time? Or was this just another manipulation, another attempt to weasel her way back into my life? The thought that she might have been in cahoots with Henderson all along, perhaps even accepting a bribe to lie about me on the stand, had crossed my mind more than once over the years. Her sudden success at the firm after my departure had always seemed suspicious. Regardless of the truth of her current predicament, the pain of her past betrayal still ran deep. It wasn't just the prison time, the lost career, the broken marriage. It was the fact that it was her, my own sister, the person who should have had my back, who had so readily thrown me to the wolves. That kind of wound didn't heal easily, if at all. And now, she wanted me to believe her, to trust her, to take on the responsibility of her children. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who had helped destroy my life was now asking me to save hers, or at least the lives of her children. The weight of that request settled heavily on my shoulders. The days that followed were a blur of internal debate. One moment, I was consumed by a burning resentment, a fierce desire to let Sarah stew in her own mess. She had made her bed, now she could lie in it. Why should I, the person she had so callously betrayed, come to her rescue? The next moment, the faces of two little girls, their lives suddenly thrown into turmoil, would flash in my mind and my resolve would waver. They were innocent, completely blameless in all of this. They didn't deserve to suffer because of their parents' mistakes. I managed to get in touch with the foster parents who were currently caring for Lily and Daisy. They were kind enough, but the reality of the situation was stark. They could only provide temporary care, and their placement was limited to a month. Sarah's trial was scheduled for 3 months out, and with both parents facing serious charges, the likelihood of them being released on bail was slim to none. The foster parents gently suggested that if no family members stepped forward, the girls would likely be placed in long-term foster care, potentially moved from home to home. The thought of my bright, bubbly nieces being bounced around the system, their sense of security completely shattered, was unbearable. The stark truth was, Sarah and I were each other's only family. Our parents had passed away years ago, and there were no other close relatives on either side. As much as I wanted to deny it, I was the only person who could potentially step in and provide a stable home for those girls. The weight of that realization was immense. The internal conflict raged on. Part of me yearned for revenge, a twisted satisfaction in seeing Sarah face the consequences of her actions. But another part, a quieter, more compassionate voice, whispered about the innocent lives hanging in the balance. Could I really let my anger towards Sarah dictate the fate of her children? Could I live with the knowledge that I had stood by while they were left to navigate the complexities of the foster care system alone? I finally confided in my partner, Michael. He'd always been my rock, a steady presence who had helped me navigate the darkest periods of my life. I laid out the entire story, from Sarah's initial betrayal to her desperate plea for help. He listened patiently, his expression thoughtful. When I finally finished, the silence in the room felt heavy with unspoken emotions. "What do you think I should do?" I finally asked, the question barely a whisper. Michael reached across the table and took my hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "I think," he said gently, "that you should take them in." His words surprised me. "But after everything she did?" "Yes," he replied, his gaze unwavering, "because they are innocent. And because you have the capacity to give them a good life, a stable home. Sarah made terrible choices, and she'll have to face the consequences. But those girls don't deserve to be punished for their mother's sins." He continued, his voice soft but firm. "And honestly," he added, looking directly into my eyes, "I think it might help you too. You've carried this pain and anger for so long. Maybe helping these girls, giving them the love and security they deserve, could be a part of your healing process." His words resonated with a truth I hadn't fully acknowledged. I was still so deeply wounded by Sarah's betrayal, and the thought of opening my life, my home to her children felt daunting. I had finally built a life where I felt safe, where I could trust again, albeit cautiously. Letting these girls in, with all the emotional baggage they carried, felt like a huge risk. But Michael's perspective was compelling. Maybe he was right. Maybe this was an opportunity not just to help my nieces, but to heal a part of myself that had been fractured for so long. Yet, the fear of history repeating itself, of being hurt again, held me back. The scars of the past ran deep, and the thought of reopening those wounds terrified me. The next few days were a whirlwind of agonizing indecision. I swung back and forth, one moment convinced I couldn't possibly open my life to Sarah's children. The next feeling the crushing weight of responsibility for their well-being. Michael was a constant source of support, patiently listening to my anxieties and gently nudging me towards what he believed was the right path. Adding another layer to my internal struggle was a secret I hadn't even fully admitted to myself until this situation arose, a quiet yearning for children. It was a desire I'd tucked away, perhaps thinking it wasn't meant to be after the turmoil of my past. But the thought of having Lily and Daisy in my home, of filling the quiet spaces with their laughter and energy, held a certain appeal that I couldn't entirely ignore. I briefly considered reaching out to Mark's family, the girls' father's side, but I realized I knew next to nothing about them. Sarah had always been fiercely independent, and our interactions with her in-laws had been minimal over the years. The chances of them being able and willing to take on 2 young children on short notice seemed slim. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of sleepless nights and tearful conversations with Michael, I made the decision. I couldn't, in good conscience, stand by and watch my nieces become lost in the system. My anger toward Sarah was still there, a dull ache that wouldn't disappear overnight, but the needs of those innocent children had to come first. I called Sarah in jail, the sound of the receiver clicking on the other end echoing the finality of my choice. When she answered, her voice was laced with a fragile hope. I'll take them, I said, the words feeling heavy but resolute. A wave of relief washed over her voice. "Oh, thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you so much. I knew you wouldn't let them down." She went on to say, her voice thick with emotion, that she wished she could go back and tell the truth on the stand all those years ago, claiming she had no idea Henderson would turn on her too. I listened, but her words still felt tainted with self-preservation, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still withholding something. There was another hurdle to overcome. Sarah informed me that her mother-in-law, the girl's grandmother, was also interested in taking custody. Apparently, she lived in the same state as Sarah and the girls and had been the obvious choice initially. Sarah explained that her mother-in-law was older and not in the best of health, but she was determined to keep her granddaughters. This threw a wrench in my plans, as I lived several states away. I managed to get in touch with Mark's mother, a woman named Eleanor. She was understandably protective of her granddaughters, and our initial conversation was tense. However, after I explained my history with Sarah and my genuine desire to provide a loving home for Lily and Daisy, she softened. I promised her regular phone calls with the girls and assured her that she could visit them whenever she wanted, even offering to help with travel arrangements. To my surprise, this seemed to satisfy her. She even mentioned adding more money to a trust fund she had set up for the twins, expressing gratitude that I was stepping up in a way Sarah never had. When I relayed the agreement with Eleanor to Sarah during our next call, her reaction was the opposite of what I expected. She was furious. "You should have fought her," she exclaimed, her voice sharp and accusatory. "You should have made sure she had no rights. That old woman can't even look after herself, let alone 2 energetic kids." I was taken aback by her vehemence. "Sarah," I said firmly, "my priority is what's best for Lily and Daisy. Eleanor loves them, and she was willing to work with me. I wasn't going to start a legal battle that would only traumatize them further." I made it clear that I wouldn't tolerate her trying to dictate how I cared for her daughters, especially after everything she had put me through. If she continued to make demands and create drama, I wouldn't hesitate to reconsider my decision and let the girls go back into the system, where Eleanor would likely have a strong case for custody. The look on her face, even over the phone, told me she understood the gravity of my words. The well-being of her daughters, even to her, outweighed her animosity towards her mother-in-law. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt a small sense of control. The day I finally brought Lily and Daisy home was surreal. They were smaller than I remembered, their eyes wide with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity as they took in their new surroundings. My heart ached for the uncertainty they must be feeling, their little worlds turned upside down. Michael was incredible, instantly putting them at ease with his warm smile and gentle demeanor. We spent the evening playing games and ordering pizza, trying to create a sense of normalcy amidst the upheaval. As I tucked them into bed that night, their small hands clutching mine, a wave of protectiveness washed over me. They were here, safe, and I was determined to give them the love and stability they deserved. Sarah's trial was looming just 3 months away. I knew it would be a difficult time, filled with uncertainty and anxiety for everyone involved. I also knew that I would likely be called to testify, given my history with Henderson. The thought of facing him again filled me with a familiar dread, but I also felt a sense of grim determination. This time, things would be different. This time, I wouldn't be the one on trial. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Sarah, who had played a part in my wrongful conviction, was now facing the possibility of being convicted for a crime she claimed she didn't commit, at the hands of the very same man. A part of me, the part that still harbored the deep wounds of her betrayal, couldn't help but feel a sliver of grim satisfaction at the thought. If she ended up behind bars for something she didn't do, it would be a twisted form of karmic justice, a taste of the injustice I had endured. It was a dark thought, one I wasn't proud of, but it was there nonetheless, a quiet whisper in the back of my mind as I looked at the two innocent faces sleeping soundly in the next room. The road ahead was going to be long and challenging, but for Lily and Daisy, I was ready to face whatever came next. And maybe, just maybe, in helping them, I could finally find some peace myself. 4 months flew by in a whirlwind of adjusting to life with Lily and Daisy. They were bright, energetic, and surprisingly resilient. We settled into a routine, and slowly, their initial apprehension gave way to laughter and a sense of belonging. Just as we were finding our rhythm, Sarah and Mark's trial began. It was a major event in their city, garnering a lot of local news coverage. The fact that the same company had been embroiled in a similar financial scandal just a few years prior, the one that had landed me in prison, was not lost on anyone. People were starting to look at Mr. Henderson, our former boss, with a renewed sense of suspicion. As the trial unfolded, I found myself uncovering some unsettling information. Through hushed conversations with former colleagues, people who had reached out after hearing about Sarah's arrest, I learned more about the inner workings of Henderson's company. It seemed his questionable practices hadn't stopped after my departure. In fact, they might have escalated. I started to piece together a clearer picture of the scheme Sarah and Mark were now accused of, and the more I learned, the more convinced I became that Henderson was indeed the mastermind. The information I had could potentially sway the trial, but it was a double-edged sword. While it might exonerate Mark, it could also implicate Sarah even further, revealing the extent of her involvement, even if she was ultimately being used as a pawn. I wrestled with the dilemma. Did I owe Sarah any loyalty after what she had done to me? Or was my priority now solely the well-being of Lily and Daisy? I took precautions, changing my phone number and being extra vigilant about my online presence. I had a feeling that if Sarah got wind of what I knew, she might try to contact me, either to manipulate me or to warn me off. My former colleagues were adamant. They believed Henderson was a cancer on the company, and they urged me to come forward with what I knew. They suspected he had covered his tracks well, but they also believed that my testimony, coupled with the new information they had gathered, could finally expose him. They were living in fear, walking on eggshells, knowing that Henderson was ruthless and wouldn't hesitate to retaliate against anyone who threatened his position. Many of them had families to support and couldn't afford to lose their jobs, which was why they hadn't spoken up sooner. They saw me as their only hope, the only one who had already faced Henderson's wrath and come out the other side. The pressure was mounting. I wanted to leave the past behind, to focus on my new life with Lily and Daisy. But the thought of Henderson continuing to manipulate and harm people, possibly even getting away with framing my sister and her husband, gnawed at me, and the idea that Sarah might be more deeply involved than she was letting on also troubled me. I knew I had a decision to make, one that could have significant consequences for everyone involved. The stories I heard from my former colleagues painted a grim picture of Henderson's reign of terror. Since I'd left, he'd become even more paranoid and controlling. He'd subtly made it known that anyone who maintained contact with me or possessed any information that could be used against him would face severe repercussions, including termination. Fear permeated the office. People were turning a blind eye to blatant irregularities, terrified of being the next ones to be implicated in his schemes. Some had even quit, unable to stomach the toxic environment, but with the job market being what it was, most felt trapped. What was particularly disturbing was the revelation of Sarah's rapid ascent within the company after my downfall. She'd received promotion after promotion, despite lacking the qualifications or experience, fueling speculation among the remaining staff. The rumors ranged from a romantic entanglement with Henderson to her being deeply involved in his criminal activities, or perhaps a combination of both. The general consensus was that they were a formidable and dangerous duo. Hearing all this ignited a dormant ember within me. The desire for justice, yes, but also a raw, visceral need for revenge against everyone who had thrown me under the bus. Henderson, of course, was at the top of that list, but Sarah was a close second. I was caught in a tug-of-war between the peaceful life I had painstakingly built and the chaotic urge to tear down the people who had wronged me. I knew I couldn't stay on the fence for much longer. The trial was moving forward, and my former colleagues were becoming increasingly insistent that I needed to act. But there was another pressing matter. I needed to ensure that my custody of Lily and Daisy was secure. The thought of Sarah, if she somehow managed to get acquitted, trying to take them back filled me with dread. I needed to find a way to gain full legal custody to protect them from any further instability. An idea began to form in my mind, a plan that felt a little deceptive but necessary. I decided I would return to my old city, ostensibly to help Sarah. I would tell her that I needed her to sign some legal documents to ensure the girls were protected from Eleanor, their grandmother, and to make it easier for me to care for them. Perhaps I would even suggest a temporary guardianship, something that would give me the legal authority I needed. Once I had that in place, I could then decide what to do with the information I had gathered about Henderson. The thought of facing Sarah again wasn't appealing, but it was a necessary step to secure the future of my nieces, and perhaps finally confront the ghosts of my past. The return to my old city felt strange, like stepping back into a life I barely recognized. The air was the same, but everything else felt different, tainted by the memories of betrayal and injustice. Visiting Sarah in jail was an even more unsettling experience. She looked thinner, her eyes shadowed with worry and exhaustion. The bravado she had once possessed seemed to have completely evaporated, replaced by a fragile vulnerability. I didn't waste any time. I presented her with the adoption papers, explaining that it was the most straightforward way to ensure Lily and Daisy's well-being and to get them on my health insurance. I framed it as a temporary measure, something that would make things easier for everyone while she sorted out her legal issues. To my surprise, she didn't put up much of a fight. She was so consumed by her own predicament, so desperate for any kind of help, that she readily agreed, signing the documents without even reading them thoroughly. A part of me felt a pang of guilt for the slight deception, but the overwhelming need to secure my niece's future outweighed any reservations. Having secured the paperwork, my focus shifted to Henderson. I had made up my mind. I couldn't stand by and let him continue to manipulate and destroy lives. I contacted the prosecuting attorney, explaining my history with Henderson and the new information I had gathered. They were initially skeptical, but became increasingly interested as I laid out the details and presented the corroborating evidence from my former colleagues. The day I walked into the courtroom, I felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. I hadn't told anyone, not even Michael, the full extent of my plan. When my name was called as a surprise witness for the prosecution, a ripple of shock went through the room. I saw Sarah's head snap up, her eyes wide with disbelief. Mark looked equally stunned, but it was Henderson's face that I watched most intently. His initial reaction was one of arrogant dismissal, a smirk playing on his lips. He probably thought I was there to support Sarah, or perhaps to offer some kind of tearful reconciliation. He couldn't have been more wrong. As I took the stand and began to recount my own experience with Henderson, the smirk slowly faded from his face, replaced by a look of dawning horror. I detailed the fraudulent activities I had witnessed, the pressure he had put on me to participate, and how he had ultimately framed me when I refused. Then I presented the new evidence, the emails and documents provided by my former colleagues, outlining the very schemes Sarah and Mark were now accused of. I pointed out the striking similarities between my case and theirs, the same methods, the same manipulations, the same scapegoating tactics. I watched as the color drained from Henderson's face. The confident facade he had maintained throughout the trial crumbled, revealing the fear and desperation beneath. He finally understood. His past had come back to haunt him, and this time there would be no escaping the consequences. The look of utter defeat in his eyes was a moment I knew I would never forget.